met him in Egypt, of all places, in Cairo. I mean, how often do you meet somebody in Cairo, especially somebody who turns out to be a life friend? That we've been friends ever since. And that was the place in the time that I first heard about IANDS. And one thing led to another and led to this. So she's part of my roots. At any rate, she just mentioned to me that her book is the only book on this subject that was ever chosen as a book of the month by the Literary Guild. So it's really, really a good book. And if you haven't read it, please pick up a copy and share it with people, because it's one of those kind that you just can't put down. It's just funny, and she just covers all different parts of mysticism and different kinds of experiences that you can have. It's just wonderful. So don't forget to get a copy of that. We'll be selling them after the meeting. And also don't forget that tomorrow she's speaking at Church of the Spirit at 2651 North Central Park. And I'll be playing my flutes, and John Fish will be playing keyboards. So we'll have special music there, and it will be great fun. It's a service. Anyway, without further ado, please give a warm welcome for Kimberly Clark.
I get my coffee cup. This doesn't feel. Oh no, there I am. All right. One of the sad after effects of a near-death experience involves electronics and how messed up they can get. So, hello. I don't want this. I wish I could just speak.
No.
No.
You can lean over the podium.
It's not on, is it?
Yeah, it's on.
Yeah, I think it's on.
Lift the podium.
Gotta get
It's on
closer
too.
then.
Try that one.
Oh, this is worse. I mean, I can hear myself, but if I'm going to be like this, I'm going to have a drink in my hand. I'm leaning against a bar, not a podium. Well, there's coffee. I don't like limitations. Let me tell you what else I don't like. I don't like change. Well, I didn't like change. I have no math or music skills. I don't understand linear space. And all of this is relevant to my near-death experience. The chances of me staying in this position for another 10 seconds is nil. So we're back to this, but
It's not on. It's on.
it's got a green light on.
Yeah, hold it close to your mouth. Yeah.
Feelings. We laugh. Seriously though, and this is a story of after the life. It's nothing to do with my near-death experience. You thought you were here to be enlightened. No, I'm here to entertain. Well, hopefully enlightened, but not until after this story. So, young social worker, Harborview Medical Center, Seattle, Washington. And I got tapped to go to Spokane, Washington, to Sacred Heart Medical Center to give a speech. Well, for a ham bone like me, this was another kind of heaven. You know, to be able to speak, and it was a medical convention. So I was going to be speaking to primarily physicians, and I thought my time has come. I'd only been giving talks in the Seattle area until then. So I bought a new wool $300 two-piece suit, new shoes, and my first attaché case, because I was going to be all that. So I get to the facility in the hospital, an auditorium many times larger than this, and to my horror, it's a stage that's just like this wampum spotlight. You can't see anything out there, and I began to have a panic attack. I'd never spoken to so many people, and I was sweating. So while, literally, I was being introduced, I was actually, there was a little bathroom just off the stage. I was in the bathroom. You want to hold this for me? Because I'm just not going to. I was in the bathroom, unrolling rolls of toilet paper and sticking them under my arms because I didn't want to ruin the suit while I was ruining my career. So I went out like, I was a snowman. And all of a sudden the light went on, and I realized I didn't have my notes. And I was there to teach on the new subject of near-death experiences. And all I could think to do was just that. And I went, feelings, nothing more than feelings. And then I just started to tell stories. I went, obviously, off script because I left my script in Seattle, as it turns out. And that was all the facts and stuff, and who cared? It was stories that people wanted to hear. So I've been telling stories ever since. But I'll start with my own. And that is that although I've been living in Seattle for 42 years, I was born in Kansas City, Missouri, and raised in Johnson County, Kansas. And I'm related to half the people in Chicago, Illinois. So every Christmas and summer was spent here. And the lovely outfit we're beholding here actually was a family wedding just almost a month to the day. Diane, do I really have to hold it? I'm getting cues in the back. If I really, is it being recorded? Is that right? So you can imagine the miracle of that. Jeez. I want a lavalier mic.
Sorry, I tried.
I know. Okay. So, Johnson County had it was the highest income per capita county in the United States, which is hard to believe unless you're from the Midwest. You know how much money is in the Midwest. There's a lot. And it's not New York City or LA. It's all in the heartland. My idea of a lot of money actually is in Kansas, where you can, drive down I-70 and you see acres and acres and acres of valuable land, countless cattle and oil pumps going like this. I mean, it's just that you have to live there. Little details. So I was living there. My daddy was rich and my mom good looking, as the song goes. My mom is still living in Leawood, Kansas, and our family home. When I go home. Same bedroom furniture, same everything is there. And at my age and in this day and age, that's a tremendous blessing. And she looks like Marilyn Monroe. Had Marilyn Monroe lived, this woman is stunningly beautiful. My dad was the senior partner in the law firm that still represents all of the tobacco companies in the United States and Canada. So life for us was comfortable on a material level. And I was firstborn, so I was the queen of everything in the family for about 3.5, 4 years, and then the little prince was born, but that's another subject. So, by the way, I'm completely addicted now to coffee, so if I'm going to hold something, it's going to be a microphone and a cup of coffee. Because it wasn't available before the break. So, into this bubble came God. But I had to die to find God. So I had decided at age 22 and 3 days, having almost graduated from Kansas State University, that I was going to get a car, ergo my first auto license. And then I was going to marry someone that I chose. Remember that thing about hating change? I knew a boy named Bob Clark, known him since the 7th grade, and I decided I was going to marry him. It was a practical decision, because my name was Clark, his name was Clark, ergo, I could continue being Kimberly Clark. I wouldn't have to change monograms on the towels. I had my life plan set. And by the way, we were in an income level where occasionally a boy would ask if I was the Kimberly Clark, toilet paper, etc. And I would say yes, because it got me one good dinner. And then the truth would come out, but I ate well. And in college that counted. So I was going to marry Bob Clark. I was going to get a car. I was going to drive. Shocking. My dad went with me. I'm going to tell you my father's side of the story because I have no memory of it, of what happened in what we call consensual reality. There's something I refer to as topside. I don't know why, it just came up with that. And that's my near-death experience. But in the realm of consensual reality, here's what my dad reports. He noticed while I was waiting for my number to come up, which was my first introduction to a hilarious God, because my number was about to come up. But I apparently chatted behind the counter with the gal behind the counter just fine, and anyway, we were leaving, and he noticed that my complexion was white on white. So I then, as we were stepping through the door, the DMV, I then collapsed, and I fell into and through his arms, because dead weight is heavier than a live weight. He couldn't support me, even though I would weigh no more than a feather at that time. Things have changed. So, a uniformed nurse happened to be passing by. She saw me collapse, trotted over, determined I didn't have a pulse or respiration. So, this was before 911. So, this was, though, in 1970, it was just before. So, 2 phone calls were made. One to St. Luke's Hospital in Kansas City, Missouri, which was the closest trauma center to my body, and the other was the Starting Mission Department of Volunteer Firefighters. Well, the volunteer firefighters showed up first. They had a brand new toy. It was a portable ventilator that had 2 functions. One was to, of course, deliver oxygen, but the other was to extract through like a vacuum mode any objects blocking the airway. Like, that's why we tell our children to not run with candy. If someone chokes during a meal, by the way, it's called a cafe coronary. I myself, if I might just chime in, and of course I have the floor and the microphone so I can, learn citizen CPR, because I did CPR in Evanston, Illinois. And I've done CPR at O'Hare Airport. The 2 times I've needed to do CPR have been in this area, but right in your neighborhood, at a pub. And a woman choked on food, and she was suffocating. And it would have been nice to have had this vacuum mode because she needed to have a clear airway. But that's why, people like laugh, and then I had a patient once, by the way, I'm a long in the tooth in medicine. I'm a social worker by trade, still licensed in the state of Washington. Got into medical academics at the University of Washington, taught death and dying for 20 years at the 2nd year level at the School of Medicine in the University of Washington system, and have done a career in the field of death and dying. And so this subject, it was like meant to be. But one reason I know a great deal about it is that I've been dead. So the rest were just academics and a lot of life experience. Anyway, learn citizen CPR, you can save a life. Although we go, oh yay, it's the other side and it's wonderful. Yeah, well, living is wonderful too. And bless every moment you can take a breath, because it is a blessing that we are given. And if you stop breathing, it's uncomfortable. So the other side might be great, but you got to get there, and that little trip can be harrowing. So the woman that I did CPR in survived. The man I did CPR in at O'Hare died, but he died in the hospital. The medics got there in time. So these medics that came to my body got there on time, but they slapped this apparatus onto my mouth, and it's a seal because you don't want oxygen squirting out from the sides. Yeah. And they turned it on. According to my dad, it was new packaging. They were ripping up this. It was brand new. They hadn't practiced at all. They flicked the switch to turn it on, and it was on vacuum mode. Oh. So what, quote unquote, killed me, according to my medical records, was this event. Why I collapsed remains unknown. When I wrote After the Light, I didn't want a journalist pulling my medical records if I hadn't seen them, so I pulled them myself. You can't chart like this anymore, but it said, primary diagnosis unknown due to snafu with a ventilator. I thought, snafu, it killed me. That's one heck of a snafu. Thank you very much. So, the nurse faded somewhere in the distance, and the firefighters were wishing that they could fade in the distance because, according to my dad, it was immediately apparent what had happened. And they did their best. They reversed the oxygen flow, but my lungs had come in contact with themselves. And our lungs are sticky suckers, and they need to be reopened under steady pressure in, like an intensive care or coronary care setting. Well, what I got by them flicking the switch that my lungs couldn't take in, so the air had to go somewhere. I'm grateful for that because a lot of it went to my brain. I'd like to think I was a lot smarter before this event, but we'll never know, will we? So what happened is that the air went then finally to my epidermis, and I literally blew up. I inflated like a balloon. It's called epithelial emphysema. Almost entirely fatal. So now it's a really big mess. I had no circulation based on, again, my dad's description, you're just black around my face, and he said my fingertips were black. And now I'm blown up. I've since had a baby. I know how elastic our skin is. So we can really stretch out, as phenomenal as it sounds. It's just that getting back in, at least I found out after pregnancy, isn't so fun. And if there were only women here, I would have another conversation about that. Like, okay, so why can't the bladder stay expanded? How come that's shrinking? While stomach keeps going bigger and bigger. It's unfair, ladies, right? So they gave up. No one but a physician in these United States of America could say death, the D word. So there's euphemisms, and I know I'm married to a paramedic. So the medic said to my dad, I'm sorry, there's nothing more we can do. At that point, and by the way, if you're from any kind of small or medium-sized town, which Shawnee Mission, Kansas is, and it's a nice Saturday afternoon, and this was before cable TV when there were only 3 channels, it's street theater when someone collapses and dies. So according to my dad, more and more people were drawn to my body. And I'm sure there were phone calls being made. Edna, you got to get down to the DMV. There's a girl dead on sidewalk. Yeah, I'm going now. So there were layers and layers of interested observers, shall we say. And in the back of that crowd came a man my dad always called the Good Samaritan. He was a man of great upper body strength because he was just plucking people aside, making a path. And he was swearing like a mule skinner. So I know for a fact he was from this area. Because we were downtown last night and I heard him. I heard him. So we don't know who he was. Just the Good Samaritan. But he plucked the firefighters off of my body and did what we now call citizen CPR. But then he stopped, turned to my dad and said, I'm not getting a blankety blank thing. Fill in the blanks. And at that, my father's memory goes away. The trauma for him never left, even though I survived. And if you have been the parent of a deceased child, even if your child is 49, it's an out-of-order experience. And the grief it's very challenging to recover, let's put it that way. So my dad enjoyed my perfect health for a long time, but this was not a happy story for him. I have the happy story, so that's what I'm going to tell you. And I'm going to try to do it with the microphone in my hand. But I talk with my hands. See? So I remember hearing a woman's voice. Couldn't see anything, it was just black, but comfortable black. But I could hear a woman's voice saying, "I'm not getting a pulse, I'm not getting a pulse." And I turned to her, and with the same sense of reality with which I'm now speaking to you, I said, "Of course you're getting a pulse. Otherwise, I wouldn't be speaking." And it was so obvious. But at the same time, she ignored me. And this went on for a while. And I don't know, did I get into like a near-death snit? Or what? I had plenty of ego going. I felt rejected. I felt ignored. I had issues with her. So, going to ignore me? Well, I'm going to ignore you. Then I found myself without a memory of how I got there, but in a completely different realm, if you will. Everything was warm and everything was great. I knew I wasn't alone. I knew I wasn't alone. And I knew I was waiting for something. And it was just so comfortable. I like the idea of warm because, as you know, winters in the Midwest, that's what I call hell. I don't mind the heat that you've had recently. That's called summer. But, our winters, forget about it. That's just too brutal for moi. So I had that much consciousness, if you will, to be aware of how physically comfortable I was. Still unaware that there wasn't physicality about it. I didn't have a body. But yet I was still sensing it. And as I waited, I began to goof around. I had vision. And I could see that this gray matter that was surrounding me, I could adjust my eyes and, love your hat? And is that going to be recorded? Can we edit out a lot of the stuff Ted's everything? Diane Spacey, and I'm silly, so welcome to Chicago IANDS. I could see that this foggy material was made up of glints of brilliant light for you smokers or former smokers. You know, the old lighter, if you were out of the fluid, it would spark. It was like that, to infinite numbers. But what else to call them? I didn't call them black holes, I called them bottomless pits. All mixed together, they made gray. I belabor this point because I have since learned that during World War II, more films were made about the afterlife than any other time of motion picture history. And every last one of those films, these are films made in America, Britain, Canada, India, China, Japan. It goes on and on. And there's some wonderful films, and those of us of a certain age, and even older, would remember like A Guy Named Joe with Spencer Tracy, and Stairway to Heaven, and Cabin in the Sky. I mean, just an amazing collection of wonderful old films. I invite you to visit, and you'll see this gray, foggy material. So I have come to think that they all go through. It's just that some of us make a U-turn and come back. Then, well, came. And this is something I can't find words for. I often get teary all these years later, and I haven't found a way to be funny about it, even though I'm naturally, at least humorous. This light, it was brighter than anything in this room. I mean, stare at the sun, don't, but it would be like a million suns, more than a million suns bright. But it didn't hurt my quote-unquote eyes. But again, I was seeing like I'm looking at you. It was at that ballot. But yet again, and this was not Kansas. And literally, Toto, we weren't in Kansas anymore, but that's going to happen in a few minutes. In my story, there was a Toto. So this light, it blasted away all of the foggy material. And I said in the presence of this light, "Homie home." I later learned from my folks that that's what I used to say. Remember that firstborn I told you about? So everything I did wound up being remembered and put into a baby book. And homie home was something that I used to say when I was a toddler learning language. I don't remember this. But when we were away from the house and pulling back the neighborhood, and I was recognizing neighborhood landmarks, before seatbelts, I would stand up and go, "Homie home, homie home." And that's exactly what I said, which is amazing. By the way, baby books, all of your parents know. So my baby book, remains this thick. My brother's about like this, and by the time my sister came along, my mother was making up statistics. I don't know how much she weighed. We'll just put 7 pounds. So, and if you're not the first daughter or firstborn, if you're not the first son, then, well, good luck to you, because you just don't really count. This light, I call God. I'm more comfortable saying Creator. As bright as it was, what it was made of was love. There was nothing else to it. It was in this form of light. I was homey home. This is who made me. At least me, the Kim that I am. And I can't even say that this light was God. There are just no words. One of the problems with a near-death experience is, but to say this light is God, even then seems a little sacrilegious. Like, it would be like saying, this light is God, but that would be discounting the wires in the ceiling, the wires to the building, the wires down at the ground, the cables that run to your local electric station, all the way back to the water that created electricity, but that water had to come from the sky in the form of rain or glacier melt or something. I mean, it's complicated and yet simple. God is complicated, but God is love, in my experience. And it was personal. It was Kimmy love. It was like, how could God even know me? It was like, what? Well, being young and brash, though, I thought this might be a good opportunity to ask some questions. So I did. And I still had enough of an ego going that I was even checking myself out. So I asked, for instance, why are we born? And then I go, well, that was a pretty good question. I mean, it was ridiculous. So, what about pain and suffering? And, why we were born, by the way, basically was, you banged on the door for this. This is what you chose to do. Don't blame me. You picked this. This light, at the same time as this conversation with God, if you will, was going on, was continuing to spread out in all directions. Again, I could see. And it was infinite. It just went on and on and on. And at the same time, in a way I can't understand, much less communicate, it was also layering endlessly on itself. And I still have the presence of mind, if you will, to think I was beholding eternity. And that it wasn't just linear, it was dimensional. So I have also come to think that the other side isn't the other side. The other side is here. We just can't perceive it. Our loved ones who have died are here. We can't perceive them. And they probably can't perceive us if they're busy doing something. But we're all like mishmashed together. It's just that in this temporal body, we are limited to 5 things, including all the love, all the energy, everything is right here all the time. And that it's possible for us to avail ourselves. And so I want to be one of those availers. And I get to do that. Okay, pain and suffering. I asked about that. And God said that's the way it is back to God, back to your source. And I thought about that. It's like exercise, which personally I can't stand. I'm not a physical person. So I can't complain about my stomach if I don't do any sit-ups. We got to work at it. And so pain and suffering is work. The pain and suffering, this was my understanding, that we get is also of our choice. That we made electrifyingly precise choices about where we were going to be born, when we were going to be born, to whom we were going to be born, and that there would be these opportunities to challenge us for the literal growth of our soul. But there's no flunking. Even though near-death experiencers talk about this at school, there are do-overs. It may not be in this flesh, but it will happen somewhere. One of my problems with this, often in a group, is, well, what about the bad guys? But God loves them too. I mean, there are some pretty wicked people out there doing awful things. But the God that I met and continue to love and worship loves him every bit as much as me. It's a level playing field. But better for our soul that we're nice for everybody. If nothing else, there's a little thing called a life review. So beware. Beware, because we are held accountable for everything. Thoughts as well as deeds. And I'm interrupting myself again, but I've talked to 2 near-death experiencers of the cajillions I have interviewed. In 1995, a graduate student of mine actually counted the number of people that I had interviewed eyeball to eyeball. So no email, no letters, no phone calls, and certainly no one else's conversations, other researchers or whatever. And it was 2,000 at that time. So I thought, I don't need to, I was already an assistant professor. I didn't need to do any more counting. So I've talked to a lot of people. Of those 2, unrelated to each other, years apart, described the same scene. And I love this and I want to share it. They were in a huge, outdoor amphitheater, but it went up, countless stories, if you were to count the rows, jammed with tens of thousands of beings that were human in appearance. But neither near-death experiencer knew if they were actually deceased souls, angels, other beings. But there they were. And they were watching a jumbotron. Huge, huge screen. And in each case, they were watching a man, just an ordinary Joe, just a guy going about his business. And it's just coincidental, I think, that each time it was a male. But every time this man did an act of kindness, people were awed. It was like being at the Super Bowl because of one act of kindness. And it wasn't even sacrificial kindness, holding a door open, asking someone, do you need help? Maybe even thinking about helping someone else would count. So that's why I suggest be nice to everybody, because we all have jumbotrons. And there are lots of invisibilities cheering for us. And they're cheering for the sake of love. So I assert that. So here I am with the source of love, for me anyway. And the form of communication wasn't English, it was math and music. And I have already mentioned I'm not skilled in either one. In fact, if this weren't being recorded, I'd tell you what I do to our checkbooks. But in the unlikely event, with the possibility my husband would see this, it would rat me out completely. But let's just say the easiest way to balance a checkbook is to change checking accounts at the beginning of each year. And let the bank tell you how much money you have. Yesterday was our 26th wedding anniversary. I've gotten away with it for 26 years, but don't tell. And music, well, Diane Willis is a maestro, and I cannot... my piano teacher quit me in the 7th grade. It was during Song of the Volga Boatman, da 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 da. And I had 2 siblings who were prodigies of music. And he was so out of there, so I can't sing to save my life. So what the heck? Math and music, and it was perfect communication. Perfect. So I finally got a metaphor for it. It happened in about 1977 when Close Encounters of the Third Kind came out. Had nothing to do with near-death experiences, but I was riveted to my seat because it felt like a near-death experience. Remember the movie? I'm sure by now you've all seen it. And the mothership comes down and it starts playing notes that the scientists have been chasing. And there's a young scientist across from the mothership blasting out these notes who's on a keyboard, imitating the notes. And then those notes go for trailers in the movie. Very different from our smartphones now. And then the computers were changing the music into math, and the scientists could read the math. Well, that's how they knew to go to Devil's Tower in the first place. So I saw that movie stunned, and I thought, who is this Steven Spielberg? Is he here? Want to, just check, just in case. So math and music. And now we have learned that developmentally, there's so much brain science going on now. Parents and grandparents, if you expose your children to music before the age of 10, their math skills will come much easier. Because until about that age, our brains can't tell the difference between math and music. It all hits the brain the same. After that, that window shuts down. So math skills, if you have not been exposed to music, become more challenging. There's exceptions to rules, of course, but just something to remember. So when skeptics say, oh, it's all in your brain, these experiences, well, duh. I'm not perceiving you through, so I don't see that as, a discount at all. So my brain was spitting out the math and music, and it was just great. And then I heard what no near-death experience met anyway, and that's that I had to go back. Well, I had a lot at stake. I was with God. And so I did what any fool would do. Any of you would do the same thing. I said no. And God said yes. And I said no. And God said yes. And we went like that. It was like a volleyball game. Yes, no, yes, no. So I'm here to witness that you can argue with God. God's going to win. At least on his court. Here we have free will, which isn't always to our advantage. But where I was, no, it was God's game. So I was sent back. Still cannot parallel park. I flunked it on that. I got my car within 4 feet of the curb, and I was done with it. And that's true to this week. Our youngest was visiting from where she moved to California this past week. And we had 2 opportunities for me to be driving and parallel parking. And each time she kicked me out of the car, went around, got in the car, and parallel parked. She didn't feel comfortable with the car at an angle. So the point I'm telling you this is that I'm back, and I've had the most sacred experience possible, but I didn't hit my body. I landed 4 feet away, exactly the distance that I flunked the stupid test with. And the first thing I thought of was, I can't even park myself. So, what the heck? And I thought, gee, interesting body, but the me that was me wasn't in that body. The me that was me was looking at that body. And again, no eyeballs, but I could see perfectly well. I was looking through legs. The whole thing was very confusing. And then I began to idly wonder what I was going to do. Was this like permanent? And what the heck? Well, it turns out that swearing like a son of a gun, stranger, the Good Samaritan, I saw a man who was unfamiliar to me bend over my body and put his mouth against mine. And I went back to my body through him and into my physical body. I think it was a combination of the physical touch, but mainly, I don't remember the physical touch. I remember the love. Here was a total stranger showing compassion and kindness, which is a very fine way to express love. I had just been with the greatest love of all, so of course, it was like a lighthouse. I was going to go to it. And I did. Caregivers? Any here? Medical caregivers? Oh, well, all right, caregivers of any kind. You don't have to be medical, you have to be a human. Well, anyway, I'm just saying, be careful about, this. You don't know who's going through you. There's so much that goes on in settings where there's a lot of suffering, a lot of dying and resuscitating and stuff. And so in teaching at the School of Medicine, that's where I got to scare everybody a whole lot, and I loved it. And don't forget, your patients might be going through you, and as they do, they also might understand everything that's going on with you, because that's how I felt. I knew everything about this guy. But then I was back in my body. Then things went very sour because it was cold. Now, actually, my admitting body temperature was 86, which sounds like a pleasant day right now outside. But for body temperature, that's really cold. I was cold, and my consciousness, if you will, was running around my body going, help, help! Because I had full awareness, and it occurred to me I was dead. I just knew it. But that I was going to be, I was afraid. It was very scary. I didn't know how to get out of this darkness, out of this coldness. It was damp. I could hear a woman's voice calling my name. Something later I thought might have been a nurse, because I did crash again in the emergency room. I wasn't out completely scot-free until later. And I always thought that might have been a nurse calling my name, but my dad years later said, you know, funny thing, everyone who attended you that day was a man. Your admitting nurses were guys, your physician was a guy, the medic was a guy, the Good Samaritan was a guy. So I've never figured out who that voice was, but it didn't matter. I was trying to get to that voice, but it was like being in a long, dark, dank tunnel blocked by heavy medieval tapestry, if you will. You know, I just would try. It might be what it's like to be in a coma, where you're still absolutely alert, maybe can't hear people, maybe can, outside of your body, but you're trapped. And it wasn't fun. So again, I did what any fool would do. And I called out to God again. Now, God made me, and God made me a whiner. I'm blaming the big guy. I began to whine for God, and it worked. It was like, please, give it, please. You know, what I do wrong? Was it that last question? You know, should I have taken it back? You know, idle thoughts of, am I flunking heaven? I mean, what the heck? I was really unhappy. Well, God showed up again. Not in the form of this brilliant light, but the math and music communication. And basically I learned that God watched Columbo. Remember that show? And how at the end of each episode, he would turn and say, one more thing. Then he would nail the guy, and it was just, you know, everything was tied up with a bow in 2 hours. Well, that's how God was Columbo. Because I say he, but it's not a gender preference thing, it's a language. I hate language. Because it's so limiting. So I can say he, she, or it. I say he because I was raised in a culture where, as Lutherans, and I'm a Lut, that's, you know, we would pray to Father, and it was he this and he that. There is no gender, though, that I perceived. Nothing like that. So, slip of the language there. God opened a window to my right, and through there was heaven. Skeptics say, oh, you get what you expect. I got Kentucky, a state I have yet to visit, but it looked like a Kentucky calendar picture. It was just endless, beautiful, waving grass, and off in the distance, white fence, and sky, and it was balmy, something that only happens in the Midwest, by the way. Never take balminess for granted. It's just ideal. The thing is, the colors were not of earth. They were of an intensity that I have yet to discover. It was more intense than anything I've ever seen, including Lake Michigan a month ago, which is pretty intense, you know, close to shore. More intense than that. Beautiful, brilliant, brilliant color. Gem tones. I mean, the colors had life. So did every blade of grass. And I was able to perceive the consciousness, if you will, to every single blade of grass because it had life, for lack of a better word. I think everything that's made has a place to go when its earth time is over. And this was grass heaven. I don't know why me. But that was my heaven, and that's where I wanted to go. So I was given a choice. Dark, moldering, cold, death, heaven. Dark, moldering, cold, death, heaven. It was, you know, I watched TV too, God, Jackie Gleason, and away we go. I was so close, and I knew that that was my border. And if I got through that window, home free, literally home and free. And this is where Columbo showed up again and went, just one more thing. And I turned, I let myself get distracted, yes, Lord. And I was shown in a series of flashes, another metaphor, but remember, I'm talking to like people who have gray in their hair throughout this talk, I realized, but remember the old flash bulbs, you know, and there were bulbs and you had to wet your fingers and pop them out and throw them on the ground because they'd break, you know, and they would like blindingly flash. These huge flashes came about. And the first flash was of a place where mountains melt water. It wasn't Kansas, but I was given to know, if you will, that if I chose to live, I would be spending my life in this environment. Yeah, well, okay, so excuse me, I'm going to heaven. And then a series of flashes, and they were of people, and not math and music, things I could read, and they were all strangers, and they all had captions, but super mundane. Best friend, next door neighbor, colleague, on it went, and I was told these are people, if I chose to live, that would be significant in my life. Again, nice God, but I'm busy, and I was going to go to heaven. And then there was another flash, and it was of me giving service. Now, until that time, service came in two varieties. What I got in terms of service, and sterling. That's it. Very limiting. That's my grandmother's $7, matter of fact. Giving service had not exactly occurred to me. And I said something to the effect of, cool. Bam, I was back. I made my choice. Had I known, but that was my choice. So I was sent back to serve, and I have been in that mode since. There were other things that happened. I saw that another future aspect is that I would die in the crash of a small white plane just before my 35th birthday. Well, you're talking about future memories. I then had to go out and just live my life because it was all displayed in front of me. It's just that it didn't come with any operating instructions. So it's like getting a new piece of electronics or a new car and not knowing how to use or drive it. So I had to figure that out. And once I was recovered, things were so different. Everything was too small for me. I just felt like I was suffocating. Kansas was suffocating. My body, since I'm interrupting myself constantly, what it's like to be out of body and come back, I don't know about for other people, but I crash land. I've never found a way to park myself. That has never happened. I've had plenty of spontaneous out-of-body experiences since then and other weird things, but never have gotten that down. So if you're a pilot, please see me afterwards. I'd like some landing instructions. And the other thing is that we seem to be a lot bigger in spirit than we are in flesh. When I've been out of body, that's been my feeling. Like I've been really big, but then we have to squish ourselves back in. And I finally found a metaphor for that too. If you're a parent, you know that Disney makes cartoons that are good, and your children want to see them over and over and over. So pretty soon you become an expert in Disney cartoon scripts. And on about maybe the 12th showing of Aladdin, the Disney film with Robin Williams, I finally got it, and here's how I got it. In this movie, Aladdin says to the genie, "What is it like to be a genie?" And the genie says, "What is it like to be a genie? All the powers of the universe. Itty bitty living space." So that's what we are. We're genies in the bottle. We're popped in. But we're huge out of body. This is the confinement. We have to take care of it though, because it is our confinement. It's good to keep thinking our little living spaces polished and well kept. It will, serve us well in this life. So now I'm having all kinds of experiences. I'm seeing dead people. I'm seeing angels. I'm seeing demons. And I had to get the heck out of Dodge. My relationship with Bob Clark was too small. Everything was suffocating me. So I bought a car, It had a stick shift. I had no idea how to drive a stick shift. What was I thinking? But it was cheaper. And after that, I eschewed my father's money. That was lifelong. I've been hungry twice in my life without asking for any help. Materialism just fell away. So a Volkswagen Squareback with a stick shift was something that I could afford. And I bought that car. I found first gear, second gear, and reverse. And I decided that I was off to find where mountains met water. I had a hamster named Toto, seriously, in a bird cage, and strapped Toto in to the front seat, went into reverse, rolled over my mother like a speed bump. She's still there waiting for me to come back from what she called when Kimmy ran away from home. And no one leaves my mother. And off I started, lurching, because first and second was as good as it got. Third, I just really couldn't find third. Forget fourth. So as I approached I-70, where I had to make a decision, right or left, the full weight of this decision became enormous. And I started to cry. Back to whining. Whining became what Oprah calls the ugly cry, where there's mucus involved, and your lips curl back so your canine teeth show, and things come out of the side of your mouth that aren't pretty, and, it's the ugly cry, and that's what I was doing. Again, whining to God, I hate change. I hate change. I decided the whole thing was off. I hate change. I hate change. While Toto's going, I'll go to the light. Toto was most uncomfortable, rolled up little ball going, we're all going to die. So I'm lurching towards the toll booth, and I-70 at that time, you had to pay a toll. And as I'm blabbering on about, I hate change, I don't want to change, I came up to a sign, and it said, change needed. You can read lips. And that's when I really knew that God had a terrific sense of humor. And God does have a terrific sense of humor. And then the next thing that happened was that I had all this mucus still happening. And I was laughing. Well, that made it even worse. If you laugh and cry, then it really gets disgusting. Being a cough and all kinds of things happen. So I looked down, and between the seats in the front was a white box with big black lettering, and it said Kimberly Clark. My name. I just went, thank you. So off we went. We went left because I thought, well, there's mountains. And I invite you, this is chapter 3 in After the Light, and After the Light is just that. So you've heard more details about my near-death experience than I usually share, because my life has been about after the light. But after the light, I headed out to find this place, sadly without a map. So first came Hays, Kansas, and a tornado. So now, I'm in Kansas, I have Toto, and there's a tornado. And I'm beginning to see a bigger picture. I wound up in Seattle, Washington, which then as now is called the Emerald City. So I am Dorothy. I really am. I've never met another Dorothy. I am it. If Dorothy had, though, not returned to Kansas and clipped her shoes 3 times, but had stayed in Oz and lived out her life, that would be me. By the way, a number of years ago, I was giving a talk in Las Vegas, MGM, and staying in the MGM, and the conference was in the MGM, and they have a Wizard of Oz store. And I was with my husband, and we went into the store, and there was Frank Baum, the author of, not him, his grandson, the author of The Wizard of Oz. And there was his grandson promoting a publishing company. He's the only person in the family that continued on with Grandpa's writing. And it's Yellow Brick Road Publishing. So I always thought The Wizard of Oz was a near-death experience. And if you think about it, Dorothy's in Flatland. Everything is black and white. And then she is swept away by this tornado and winds up in Oz, where everything's in color, and there's all kinds of strange creatures, both wonderful and scary, and on and on. And then she's sent back, and she says to those around her, you were there, and you were there, and you were there. And she's told, like every near-death experiencer can relate to, there, Dorothy, it was just a dream. So I asked young Mr. Baum, did your grandfather have a near-death experience? He was, no. But he went back to the family and his aunts and uncles. This began a relationship that led to him writing. I had a daughter when he was 7, now she's 24, so was that many years ago? He wrote a book just for her in his own handwriting. So because of that one little bit, that's my little claim to fame. I took the Baum family on a journey that they're still on, wondering, what the heck? You know, there's 25 Oz books, and they're all like near-death experiences. So I invite you to read the books more than the movie. The books of the slippers are not ruby, they are silver. But I don't care. The movies would impress me. So I have more red shoes than you can imagine. And I love each and every one of them. I'm a shoe person anyway, but we'll talk about that another time. But please don't leave without noticing my cute shoes. So I finally wound up in Seattle, where mountains melt water. And the last joke that God had on this journey called Near-Death Experiences and the immediate after effects is that I was all that. I'm with God. You know, and we're hitting this town. And I knew as soon as I crossed into city limits, everything went wrong. But then there was this big honking sign. And what is it about God and signs? When people say, send me a sign, be careful what you pray for. You're going to get a sign. And this sign said, will the last person leaving Seattle please turn out the lights? It was Boeing bust. And I have a little K-State degree, you know, in early childhood development, and I was going to be all that. But you know what? I was all that. Because everything that I have done from then till this breath, the air that I've taken, works for me if I'm being of service to others. It's just, I'm always in the right place at the right time. I know that when I give a talk, the right people are listening, and the right people are falling asleep. Gotcha. I know there's no accidents. I also have come to believe, I have a friend who is Hindu in Seattle, and in her belief system, it's that, may I borrow you? Will you stand up here? Haha, it's okay when you come in late. In the Hindu belief system, even if you brush the shoulders of somebody, they're okay. If you encounter someone, it's believed that we're here on this journey. There's no time, you know, after we get off of Earth. So I guess we're connected.
Yes, thank you.
By the way, I don't charge for my talks, but I do get paid, and that's in HUDs. And I would just love a big paycheck after this meeting. So, life goes on. I wound up in graduate school. Again, I'm in the right place at the right time. I get, you know, proper initials after my name, which are still in place for academics and for being credible. And academics need a gig. It's publish or perish. And nothing excited me. I was working at Harborview Medical Center, which is a trauma center that still serves 1/4 of the landmass of the United States of America. And I was in coronary care, intensive care, and people die all the time. You know, flatlining is just another day of the job. And never taken lightly, but it's just routine, So I had done an internship at Harborview, and now I was employed as a young social worker, looking for something to research. And in April 1977, that something came along in the form of Maria, was her name. And I can't remember her last name. I've been blank on that for a long time. I just remember it's really common. Doesn't matter, because Maria had been admitted the night before, unconscious. Maria was in Seattle for the first time. She was actually a migrant worker from Mexico who, in those days, and you know because you're surrounded by crops, that at least in the West, Mexicans would come up and there were no like border wars like now. They would cross the border and work the prevailing crops up to Canada and then go back home until the next year. And everyone who had crops depended on these people. They were willing to do work that citizens weren't willing to do. And cheap labor, yada yada. So Maria was part of that migration of workers from another country. She went to Seattle for the first time, had herself one big honking heart attack. Was admitted to Harborview. Well, the next day when I came to work, there are all kinds of social work related things that needed to be done, you know. And she was really nice. I liked her. So I spent a lot of time with her. I had a lot of patience, but because of, you know, higher needs, I spent more time with her than with others. And the third day after she was admitted, I was charting. I was sitting in the monitor room with a monitor nurse, and all of a sudden, someone was flatlining. No big deal. It happened like, you know, anything in a hospital like that. It was not a big deal. This is a university hospital, and when someone flatlines in a university hospital, you don't get a nurse, a doctor, and respiratory therapist. You get the thundering herds, because there will be interns and residents in nursing, in respiratory care, and in physician medicine. And then you get the social workers. So there are about a dozen people in there, and I was at the door. It was Maria. I watched a very easy resuscitation. She was unconscious when I went about my business, but she was breathing on her own fine. Later in the day, I got paged back up to the unit because Maria was awake and very agitated, and the nurses were concerned that she would get flipped right back into cardiac arrest. And so social worker, go fix it. So, but she was about to fix me. Because I got up there, and now I'm condensing a long conversation. Of course, darn it, couldn't find a translator. And I had like un poco Espanol, and she had a little English. So, but if you travel, you know, there's like traveler's language, or I need to go to the, you know, that, you can work it out. You can work it out. So we were working it out. And so what Maria told me, very condensed, is she found herself during resuscitation looking down on everybody, and she correctly told me who was in the room for the most part, and where the machinery was, and I didn't believe her, because Maria was actually speaking in a way to the best person possible, but in another way to the worst person possible, because, oh, by the way, in the ensuing 7 years, having gotten my license as a clinical social worker, I had self-diagnosed and decided I was a highly functioning schizophrenic. Because